The emotional toll of prison leads convicts to vent their frustrations in devastating ways. I discuss this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today it is Short Story Tuesday, so I want to talk about an interesting short story that I found. And today's short story is all about prison and prisoners. I am referring to First Snow by Davy Rothbart, which was published in 2002 in his short story collection, The Lone Surfer of Montana, Kansas. For those who don't know, Davy Rothbart is an American writer who has been writing and also working on various magazines since the 90s. They worked as a scalper in the past, but they also are the founder of Found magazine, which is just a magazine of things that Davy and others have apparently found at random or something like that. They've written a number of op-eds out there, and they're also an NPR This American Life contributor. I don't really know too much else about Davy Rothbart. I think this is like one of the few fictional kind of things that he's published. And there's a whole bunch of other nonfiction out there that he's written. But without further ado, let's talk about First Snow. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So First Snow focuses on an unnamed narrator who is part of a prison highway cleanup crew. He's at a prison for first or second time offenders, and he's not having a good time, kind of serving out a pretty lengthy sentence, but almost free, it would seem. And everyone on this cleanup crew, which consists only of a few guys here and there, they make fun of a black man who's part of the crew, kind of a very weak, very non-confrontational kind of guy named Maurice. They antagonize him, just threaten to punch him and push him around and make fun of him, and he doesn't really do anything about it. He seems kind of out of it. And as time goes on, everyone just gets unhappier and unhappier with the cleanup crew, and they have to do things during the winter. They thought they'd be working in the kitchen during the winter months, but they have to wear jackets and clean up outside during the winter. And at one point, Maurice breaks down and starts crying and says that his brother has died. He died in an accident, or the police or somebody meant to shoot somebody else, but they shot his brother, and the cleanup crew doesn't seem to respond to that, but I think the narrator does tell him to shut up. Clearly not doing too well. And I think it's because, or the narrator notes, if I were the small, weak one, everyone would be tormenting me. So maybe this is just a way to deal with the pressure of prison and whatnot. But at one stop on the highway, the prison guard opens up the van, and another car comes out of nowhere and hits the van as well as the prison guard, knocks him out in the snow. He's getting kind of buried by snow at this point. Everyone thinks about leaving, but they decide they can't really do that because they're close to being released, and if they ran away, they'd be caught and given another sentence there. But at this point, they all kind of pile on Maurice, take him outside, hold him against the car, and beat him up to a bloody pulp, and just leave him there. But eventually they decide they need to take the prison guard to the hospital, as well as Maurice. So they drive there, drop him off, and as the story comes to a close, the narrator is trying to forget about what happened, about his actions towards Maurice. And he knows, he'll just end up in prison again once he gets released. So not really looking forward to that happening. And that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there's a little bit worth talking about with First Snow. One of the things that Rothbart is talking about here is that of the emotional toll that one experiences. In particular, he's talking about prison, and it's not easy being in prison, which isn't exactly the most original thought. But I guess looking at the sort of psychological and emotional nature of prison is pretty solid writing there. And there's no way to sort of relieve those emotions. You just kind of got to stick with it. There's an interesting quote that I would like to read to you from this. Every emotion can basically be experienced in two distinct ways, as felt in freedom and as felt in shackles. There is happiness behind bars, but it is always chained to something large and immovable. Anger on the inside has no place to go. Even loneliness and grief and loss cannot be felt as fully in prison as when you are free. Which is a very sad quote, but essentially it's saying, there's emotions when you're free to experience anything that you want, and there's emotions in prison. Happiness is chained, but every other emotion feels muted because you're not experiencing it while free. You're experiencing while behind bars, and you're not completely able to express it, which I think is what the narrator Rothbart is getting at there. So for these prisoners, tormenting Maurice provides an opportunity to create an outlet for this despair. They can torment him and bug him and take out their rage on him, which they can't do with anyone else, because if they try to do it to somebody stronger, that person might actually fight back, and then you have an additional problem on your hands. But Maurice isn't going to do that, so you're free to torment him however you want. And I do also think that Maurice freely experiencing his emotions, like being afraid and whatnot, and also crying when he hears about his brother dead and wanting to be out of prison. I feel like he's seen as weaker for that, even though he is willing to experience his emotions. Like, he's doing something that normally people would do, but I think there's that expectation that if you're in prison, you have to mute that sort of thing, because again, you're seen as weak. But I think Maurice being scared also kind of brings to light how all of them are scared, except they're not willing to cry. Because again, like, if you cry, if you show any weakness, what happened to Maurice is just going to happen to you, which sort of underlies a greater sort of torment in being in prison. Not only are you behind bars, not only are you not free at all, but you're also not free to experience those emotions that you're feeling at any given time. There's also a sense of selective forgetting in this story. Prisoners will do their best to ignore the horrors of captivity. This story isn't necessarily the first one to try to explore that. You have Shawshank Redemption and a great many other stories. I say Shawshank because that just comes to mind most immediately. Maybe also Green Mile, but it's tough being in prison, and so you try your best to forget about the horrors that you're experiencing. And so once the prisoners do their best, or once the prisoners beat Maurice, they do their best to forget. There's no sense dwelling on what was done to Maurice, because if you acknowledge what you did to Maurice, how you hurt your fellow man, it's going to make you feel worse. Although, like, to be honest, boo-hoo, you beat somebody up. Like, we're not going to feel sympathetic for you for that reason. But again, like, those prisoners have to forget that sort of thing. They have to forget what was done to them in prison, or it's going to weigh on their mind a little bit. However, as the story comes to a close, again, the narrator specifically notes that even though he's trying to forget, it's not exactly easy. He does find it hard to remember what he's done, but he knows that he's going to just end up in prison in the future because of what he did here and what he's capable of. So it does seem like the bill is coming due here. He chose to enact violence, and now he's just going to end up back in prison because this is what he's fully capable of. This is what all the men who beat up Maurice were fully capable of. So no matter how much you try to forget, to make yourself feel better, like the truth still remains out there. It's you can't escape all of your actions. One last thing I'll note is it does seem like Rothbart is trying to get us to empathize with these characters, as many stories about prison do. Just empathizing with the horrors of prison and getting you to feel for, what these characters might be thinking. I do think that's kind of a challenge in this story because Rothbart specifically notes that Maurice is a black man, and he specifically notes that when they beat up Maurice, they say a bunch of horrible, awful things to him. Essentially, they've committed a hate crime against Maurice while he was in prison. And so it becomes really hard to empathize with these characters, especially with the narrator. Because, you can say, prison drives you to do awful, terrible things, and there's a terrible emotional toll. But at the same time, if what the emotional toll is driving you to do is to commit a hate crime against a black man, then maybe you belong in prison. Maybe this is where you belong. I don't think Rothbart is saying what he intends to say here. I think you're more meant to empathize with these characters, but again, because of what they do, I feel like that's a bridge too far. And the story doesn't have the intention, or it doesn't come out the way that Rothbart really intended there. Anyway, those are my thoughts on First Snow by Davy Rothbart. Pretty interesting short story. I don't think it completely lands, especially because some of the elements that Rothbart introduces, it might seem intentional, but I feel like the message gets muddled, or maybe I'm misunderstanding what exactly it is Rothbart is trying to say. The rest of the stories in this collection are interesting, but there's a lot of mixed sort of feeling there. So I don't think that this short story or this collection really lands and is really worth recommending unless you just find it at your local library like I did here. It might be worth checking out if you're interested in a wide variety of interesting short stories from maybe an unconventional author. If you have any thoughts on this, let me know in the comments below. Would love to hear from you. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this short story or this author if they don't know about either of those things. Join the Discord if you want to have further conversations about books, movies, TV. There's a link to that in the description. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and prisoner-related travels. Farewell.